Hello and welcome to AVR120. Today we're going to be going over how to set up an interaction system and how to use an interface to do so. So we discussed interfaces a little bit before, but essentially what we're going to go ahead and do here is set up a system where the player will have an interface attached to them as well as objects, and they will all have an interact method. And so when the player interacts with the object, depending on what they have implemented in their interface, they will perform different actions. So interfaces essentially are a way to create the same method on multiple objects, but then have what's called different implementation or functionality in that function. So we'll go ahead and begin, and I'll kind of show you what I mean by all that. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go to our player, and we're going to create a script, and this will be called player interaction. So we'll go ahead and type in player interaction, and we will create and add the script on there. And we'll go into C# here. Okay, so um, the first thing we are going to go ahead and do here is set up essentially a way for the player to detect game objects near its current position. So we'll go ahead and do this by creating a method called getNearestGameObject. So we'll go ahead and under update, we'll create a private method of type GameObject. A private method. It'll return a game object, and we'll call it getNearestGameObject. And we're getting an error because it needs to return a game object, so we'll set that up here. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is declare declare game object, and we'll call it result, and we'll set it equal to nothing at the start. And so this will hold the game object that we get when we're doing our detection. We'll go ahead and create a array variable here, and we will set it equal to, sorry, we need to go back and back up here. We're going to create a camera variable. And we'll need to go ahead and assign the value of this variable in start. So we'll go ahead and set camera equal to, and it's going to be our main camera in the scene, so we can access the camera class and main. Okay, so now back in getNearestGameObject here, we'll set the array equal to our camera variable and the method called screenPointToArray. And if you take a look at this method, it says returns array going from camera through a screen point. So we'll access that screen point to array here, and we will give it our mouse position. And so now it will shoot a ray from the camera through the screen, from the camera, which will be our screen, and it will shoot a ray wherever our mouse position is. Now what we'll go ahead and do is run a check, and we'll essentially use physics.raycast and our array that we just created to go ahead and check the environment. So we'll say if physics.raycast here, and then if we mouse over raycast, it says it casts a ray from point origin in direction of length mass distance against all colliders in the scene. So we're going to give our raycast ray, the ray that we created. It's going to return a a hit variable, and it will have a distance of 3. And the reason that we're using this var keyword here is that it's kind of essentially an implicit data type. If we use var, it's going to anticipate what the data type is, so we don't have to set it. We don't have to set it directly. And so now what we'll go ahead and do is we will set the result game object, so the one that we just set to null, and we'll set that equal to the hit.transform of the game object that we hit. So we're going to shoot a ray out from where our mouse is positioned on the screen, and then we'll go ahead and return this result, which we've set to the game object. And you basically do that by getting the hit, this raycast hit variable. All right, it's the transform of that variable, and then from the transform we can get the game object entirely itself. We'll go ahead and then return the results, which will get rid of the error here, and that's what we're going to be getting back from this method. So now we have the game object stored in the result variable. So we can go ahead and do some stuff with it. We can go ahead and set up our interaction here. So first, what we'll want to go ahead and do, though, is implement our interface. So again, just to reiterate, the interface is essentially a way to implement a method or other data onto a class, but allow it to essentially have its own version of that method or that data. So it's described as like a promise. It's a promise that the class will, and it's called that because the class must implement the interface. If it doesn't implement the interface that it's got added to it, so if it doesn't apply the method essentially that's inside of the interface, it will break the, it will break, it will error out. So I'll show you what this kind of looks like here. So we'll do it outside of the class, and we will create a public interface, and we'll call it IInteractable. That's kind of the naming convention, is to put an I in front of an interface. And it essentially functions almost like its own class. And in fact, it is essentially like an abstract class, which is a class that's like a base class that you can have other classes inherit from. So we'll go ahead and we will put a public void, and interact will be what we call the function. And so now what we can go ahead and do is I'll show you a little bit of how this works. Okay. We can go ahead and add the interface. So you'll put a comma after mono behavior, and we'll put in the IInteractable interface. And we'll get an error. And that's because we need to implement the interface. If you have it attached, you need to implement it. So we'll go over here to quick actions, and we'll say you'll see it says implement interface, and we'll click that. And you see that it's added this interface function and an exception essentially. So this is we don't have anything in the interact method, and we're not going to need anything at the moment inside this interact method for the player, but it's good to just have it on there. And for the purposes of this lesson, we're not going to really add anything in here, but we'll be able to go ahead and apply this interface to other objects in the scene, and it'll do different things. So now that we've went ahead and added that, what we can go ahead and do now is go to our update function and set up some interaction. So we'll go ahead and we will use the var kind of general data type there, and we'll create another variable of type game object. All right. And we'll set it equal to get nearest game object. And so we can go ahead and then on the next line here, we can do a check and say if the near game object is not is equal to null, all right, then we just want to essentially return to the program. And that way, if this returns nothing, all right, because if this is null, right? So if this returns null in this line here, it won't throw an error. It is just going to return nothing, essentially. Okay, and so now we have to set up our key bindings here. So we'll save this. We'll go back into Unity, let the scripts compile a little bit, and we want to go into our editor. So we'll go to Edit, Project Settings, and in the editor, we'll go ahead and we'll add another button. And then you'll see we have another cancel button here. So we can open that up, and I'm going to call this interact. And I'll set this equal to my E key here. So again, project settings, or edit project settings, and then input manager, and then switch the size to 19. Rename this. This will be like cancel, a second cancel. Rename it to interact, and then rename the positive button to whatever you like. I'm going to set it to E. Okay, so we can go ahead and save this now. And now that we have the basic interact button kind of set up here, we'll go back into player interaction. And inside of this, we'll go ahead and we'll create an interaction or an input for interaction. And what happens there if we set that up. So we'll say if, and we'll use the input class to get button, and we want to specifically get button because we want this to return true while the virtual button identified by button name is held down. So we want this, I want this interact to work when it's held down. And I'll show you why in a sec here. So we'll say, we'll call this interact, which is, it needs to be the exact name, remember, of what's in your input manager. And we'll go ahead and create another var variable of type interactable. And we will set this equal to our near game object. And from that game object, we're going to get a component of type INteractable. And we will go ahead and say we need to run a check to make sure that it has that on there. And we need to have a contingency for if it doesn't. So if it doesn't, we'll say if the interactable is equal to null, then return nothing. Okay. So we set so we're not getting errors, and we're setting interactable to something. We don't get a null reference exception, which is just that the variable has nothing essentially in it. Okay, and then we will go ahead and access this interactable and set it and access the interact method off of whatever we get. So to unpack this a little bit here, okay, we set up the input. Okay, we're going to, when we press the input down, we're going to scan the area. We use this method here, the get the nearest game object, to kind of create array and essentially scan the area for our nearest game object by creating an array and then doing the physics.raycast. We're setting the results, which is a game object. Um, we're setting that to a variable called result. We'll return result. We run a check here to make sure result actually is something. Okay. And then we'll go ahead here and say if we press our input key down, our interact key, we want our variable, we want to create a variable called interact, and we're going to set that equal to our nearest game object that has the get component, that has the IInteractable interface, okay? And if that interactable, okay, is equal to nothing, then just return nothing. Otherwise, we want to go ahead and access that's interactable and access the interact method that is on that game object that has the IInteractable interface, and it's going to have this interact method here because remember, if we created an interface, we're going to basically add it to that object, and it's going to have to implement this interact method. If it does not implement this interact method, it will throw an error. Okay, and so we can by setting it up this way, we can basically have game objects that have different interaction methods on them that are all called interact, but will do different things. So now what we'll go ahead and do is we will go to the target script. So we're going to click our wooden crate here, and on the wooden crate, we'll go to the target script component and double click target. And on here, what we'll go ahead and do now is we'll basically say we'll add the interact interface. So we'll go IInteractable. We'll implement the interface. And now we have an interact method. And so we'll go ahead and delete this exception message here. And instead, what we're going to want to go ahead and do here is we're going to set up our interaction. Okay, so we'll select the first person player here. We will right click and we're going to create an object. We're going to create a cube. And that's what we'll use to represent the object that we are picking up and placing in front of our player. So this will be called pick up position. And we don't want a box collider because we don't want it to be colliding with anything in the scene. We just want to use it as a visualization and to use the positional value of it in relationship to our player. So we'll go ahead and remove the box collider component from it. We'll select it again in the hierarchy, and then we will move it out. And I'll check it in the game view here. Okay, so move it down a little bit. I think I kind of like it a little bit over offset a little bit that way, so it's not in front of the gun. Okay. So we can kind of play with this all day. I think that's fine. Just get it to where it's kind of in front of your camera and makes sense positionally. So we'll save that, and we'll go onto our wooden crate, and we will go ahead and click the back into the target script. So back in the script here, with the IInteractable interface implemented, we will see that we have that interact method there. And so what we can go ahead and do is we will go into the interact method here, and we're going to get the game component that this method is on, and it is going to be a rigid body, so a physics game object of type rigid body. That is what allows the physics system to be implemented onto the object, and we'll access the use gravity field, and we will set it to false. Then what we'll go ahead and do is say that this game object's position, so this dot transforms dot position, okay, so what this script is on, we will set that equal to our pick up position dot position. So, and I apologize. We need to make sure we have that public transform pickup variable here, and that's where we're going to drag our reference to our pickup position we just created, and we will set the transform of this object equal to the transform of the position that we are referencing. And so when the player presses the interact key, it will essentially run this code here from this script. And in addition to that, all right, in order to kind of, we're going to have some issues with turning the gravity off and then turning it back on. So once we turn it back on, it'll immediately kind of plummet back to Earth. So what we need to do is an update to consistently make sure that the gravity is set to true. Because when the player presses the key down, the interact key, it will set the gravity to false and override essentially what's happening each frame here. So we will say we'll access the rigid body component again on this object. All right, and we will set its gravity field to true. And so we can go ahead and save this now. And if we go back into Unity, we will see that we now have a section for pickup position. So we need to go to the player and drag the pickup position reference into that target script there. And if we save this now and we go ahead and run it, oh, before we do that, we want to take this pickup position and we're using it as a visualizer, so we can just turn off the mesh render. And then that way it won't be in front of our camera in the scene. And so if we go ahead and we press play now, if we walk up to the cube and press E, oh, looks like we're getting an error here. So it says the input button interact is not set up. So I must have named it incorrectly. So if I go to edit and project settings here, yeah, see, I have a capital I. So if I just put this to a lowercase, or I can change it in the script too, that works as well. Go ahead and exit out of here. We'll save it one more time. So it needs that again. We'll need to go to the input manager. So edit, project settings, input manager, and then just make sure that this is a lowercase or whatever you basically call it in the script. Okay, so if I go ahead and I press play and I go to the cube and I press E, you can see that it picks up the cube. Now it's a little kind of, obviously it's pretty jittery. It has some problems there. So it needs to be refined a little bit, but for what we're trying to do here, I think we can kind of leave it as is for now. And kind of gets the point across there. So go ahead and that'll do it for the interaction portion in terms of picking up objects. But we can also go ahead and create another form of interact. So we will do that by essentially going, we're going to do a little bit of level building here. So we'll go into the assets menu here. We'll go into our prefab, and we need to go into the sci-fi modular pack, excuse me, and then we'll go into the prefabs here. And we want to go ahead and let's go into the corridor here, and we will create a simple room. So I'll drag the T corridor in here, and I will scale it up a little bit here, and I will rotate it 90 degrees on the Y. Um, Kind of move it out and just keep scaling it up a little bit till it kind of meshes with the we can kind of see what the try to get it to be the same here. Okay, so kind of close enough there. And then we can try to create a little environment or a little room here by going back into the prefabs folder, and I'm going to go ahead and go to like walls, and I'll just go ahead and add like a kind of glass pane wall in here, and I could scale it a little bit on the Y and scale it up, kind of get it to match the ends here. It won't be perfect, but for our purposes, it'll be okay. Okay, so we'll kind of do something like that, and I will just go ahead and once you've got it kind of set up as a wall, duplicate it, and I'll just move it to the other side here, like so, and try to get it to make sure that it's attached to that wall as closely as possible. Okay, and then we'll go into the decorative elements section here. And I want this console, so I'll drag this console in. Drag it into the scene here. And I'll also rotate it 90 degrees. And actually, it's going to be -90. And I'll put it in the middle, and I will kind of um, scale the entire thing up a little bit. And I'll drag the kind of condense everything back down. I'll drag the corridor in the environment, and I'll put it in the secret base. And then I will also go ahead and add the panel here and the other panel. Maybe I'm going to parent these to the room here, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just drag this as the console into the secret base as well, but at the bottom here. And I will go ahead and add a script to this console. So I'll go ahead and go to add component, and I will call this end level console or end level switch, and I'll add a script here, and we can use this to change the scene. So we'll go into the end level switch, and we can add the interactable interface like so, and we have to make sure to implement it. And now we have the interact function here, and we'll want to go ahead and we want to change the level too, change the scene, so I can kind of show you guys that. So we'll say using scene Unity engine dot scene manager, or scene management, excuse me. And right, but you could actually make it so that we can pick the scene we want to use. So we'll just create a public int and call it scene to load. And instead of 1 here, we can give it scene to load and save. And now I can choose what scene I'd like to put in here. All right, so back in the game here, we can see that the end level script, end level switch has a scene to load integer on it now. And so I'm going to set this to 0, and I'll save it. And now we will see that when we interact with the switch here, okay, that it will go ahead and set the level back to desert, okay? So that's kind of how the scene loading works in Unity. Okay, so that should do it for this session. Um, remember to hand in this project on the 16th. This is a kind of an additional feature to add, and I'm going to make one more video regarding enemy AI. Those will both be kind of additional fun features to add, but won't be required in the final project. The last required video is on the footsteps. Okay, so thank you very much, guys, and have a great rest of your day.